organization. Sorry. And we're part of a network of 125 French chambers around the world and 18 French-American chambers around the US. Today, we're very proud to have our first sustainability webinar that is being held by our sustainability committee. I won't introduce everyone because I think Chloe will do it. So I'll just pass on to you, Chloe, who's one of the co-chairs of the Sustainability Committee.
Okay, fantastic. Well, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Emma, and welcome everyone, especially our panelists. So indeed, this is our first for this year for the Sustainability Committee. We have quite a great group, which I hope will be joining as we go along this morning. The chairs are myself, Christine Offlinger, and Ellie Asmar, who should be online as well. And we have Lucie also Guanel, who has been a very supportive committee member and helped us actually put this panel, speaking panel together. So today we're going to focus on circular economy strategy. And we are very lucky to have some great speakers, which I will introduce very quickly. We are going to start this morning with Emeline Cardozo, who is the manager in the sustainability practice at Accenture, and she's also the program lead of the Circulars Accelerator, which is a partnership with the World Economic Forum. They help startup founders build circular businesses, and they help them scale and contribute to the circular transition. So Emily will set the stage of what is circular economy strategy and give us some example of what's happening. We will then pass the mic to Mathieu Agues, who is a French entrepreneur who successfully launched the first open innovation class dedicated to solving plastic pollution at UC Berkeley. It's called Deplastify the Planet, which is quite necessary, as we know. And he also is the founder and CEO of School Lab US, which is at Berkeley as well. It's an innovation studio that works with major corporations across the world and also put them in contact with startups. And he will talk to how some of those startups will be helping with the circular economy. After Mathieu's presentation, we will welcome Eden Brookman from, she's actually with the San Francisco Department of the Environment for the City and County of San Francisco, and she is the Senior Green Building Coordinator. Eden will share a lot of the initiatives that the city has from an environmental standpoint, and also talk about some of the building initiatives, which actually include a partner that they've signed up with, which is Reply, and that's where Gar Punet will be coming on after Eden, and he'll talk to us about what Reply's software does and how they essentially assist large academic, government, and Fortune 100 enterprise partners in building technology that empowers zero waste and circular solutions. So I welcome these four great speakers and look forward to their presentation. So Emeline, if you want to take the lead, then Leah is going to put up your presentation.
Sounds great. Thanks, Chloe. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emeline Cardozo, and as Chloe shared, I'm a manager on the sustainability strategy team at Accenture, joining you this afternoon from rainy Vermont. So jealous of everyone in California who's dialing in. And my role today is to share a bit of context on the circular economy for you all. So I'll give us some working definitions, discuss how circular is different or additive to recycling, for example, share some examples of how circular economy can unlock embedded value in waste streams. And Accenture and my colleagues and I have been really working on the forefront of circular economy innovation for over a decade at this point. The team has written 2 books on the subject, including the Circular Economy Handbook, which came out in 2020, and much of the content I'll be sharing with you today is taken from that publication. And we really believe that the circular economy is a key lever to invent the way that we produce and consume, to improve how we all work and live. So I'm really excited to share that perspective with you today, and then hear from some of my fellow panelists on their perspectives and contributions to the circular transition as well. This will be split into 3 parts. I'll give a brief review of the problem at hand, talk about the strategic imperative for transitioning from our current linear system to a circular system, and then go through what the circular business models are and what are some different enablers that we can use to achieve them. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Leah. With all of the media attention on the climate crisis, it's interesting to note that the transition to renewables and renewable energy really takes up a lot of the spotlight. And it's interesting to consider that energy production actually only accounts for about half of global GHG emissions. And in order to solve for the other half of emissions, we need to change how we produce and consume and dispose of resources. And research from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a highly reputable NGO in this space, has shown that moving to renewables can address about 55% of global climate goals. So really the remaining 45% must come from other strategies like the circular economy. And we can see on the next slide that our current rate of resource use has negative impacts beyond GHGs, of course. So the UN Environment Programme research shows that we're on track to exceed the Earth's capacity for resources by 2060, which will lead to impacts such as supply chain disruptions, worsening pollution, climate change, topics that are top of mind for all of us today in 2022. And the good news is that by implementing sustainable products and consumption measures, we can try to keep resource use within sustainable levels and mitigate many of these risks. And we can do that by using products at their end of life and waste streams as manufacturing inputs to reharness the value of resources that we've already extracted. To give just one quick example on this slide, plastic recycling. So according to the IEA, plastic production is actually set to be the largest driver of oil demand globally through 2050. So if we can effectively scale plastic collection and improve sorting technologies, for example, then perhaps our reliance on oil for virgin plastics could be mitigated or reduced. So let's align on the definition of the circular economy. On the next slide, I will start by talking through our current economic system, which is a linear economic system. This means that we extract resources and energy. We use those resources and energy to produce products and services that we all consume every day. And at end of use, most products get wasted or are thrown away, or at best recycled. And the linear economy is really perpetuating an unsustainable system with significant embedded value that is lost. When a layperson thinks about waste, maybe they think about wasted resources, so wasted materials and energy. And we take a 4-dimensional view of waste that also includes wasted capacity. So this is products that aren't used to their full capacity, wasted life cycles, so the ending of usage of products prematurely, as well as wasted embedded value. So this is components or materials or energy that are not recovered at end of use. If you go to the next slide, on the other hand, the circular economic system seeks to close the loop on that take, make, waste value chain, reinventing the way that we produce and consume so that waste is designed out, products are kept within productive use for as long as possible, materials, components, and energy are looped back into the system, and we ultimately move to something more regenerative or restorative. So what does that mean? By leveraging the circular economy as a path to achieving environmental restoration, we could meet our growing demand for consumption while actually decoupling from our reliance on scarce and non-renewable resources for growth. So it's really a wholesale shift of our current model, which is driven not by moral obligation, but by a concrete business case. And we've got some great examples of some of these different types of waste being mitigated later in today's program. If we go to the next slide with a few case studies to kind of bring this to life a little bit, I'll highlight maybe just one of these critical environmental challenges that could be faced by this, that could be addressed by the circular economy, excuse me. So to take that example along the top, the metals and mining industry generates about 10 billion tons of waste per year. Apple, a company we're all familiar with, is recovering waste metals from old phones and laptops to be reused for their latest products, giving these materials a second or even multiple life cycles. That's just one industry example, but these applications are really cross-industry, as you can see on the slide here. And I think probably excitingly for this audience, beyond the circular economy's usefulness as a tool to address environmental challenges, it presents a business opportunity. So if you go to the next slide, Accenture Research has placed the global value that could be unlocked by circularity at 4.5 trillion USD. That equates to 142 billion for the state of California. And in that projection, most industries would see several billion in potential unlocked value. Just to share a little bit about the methodology on that top level figure there, we assume that the Earth cannot perpetually create more resources. So we use the UN goals, one planet economy as a baseline, then take GDP, population growth, resource trends, et cetera, to forecast resource demand and think about resource availability, then take that resource shortfall into economic impact. So that's how we arrive at that massive $4.5 trillion figure. But I think it's really exciting to think about some of the industry impacts and the different ways that value can be unlocked here. And many companies are already realizing significant business value from their circular product lines. A few examples along the bottom here that are particular to the state of California. I'll offer just a few more. In 2020, for example, about 75% of Schneider Electric's total revenues were from green label products. Similar product lines netted about 14 billion euros in revenue at Philips. And 25% of Veolia's turnover was attributed to their circular economy initiatives. So some exciting, global examples of how this is coming to life. And within the state of California, there's a very heavy job creation angle as well. So if we think about some of the recycling rate goals that the state currently has in place and that are in law, there's a projected 128,000 jobs, green jobs, that could be created in the state of California by 2030, for example. There's a lot going on in the policy space here. If we go to the next slide, I'll just very briefly touch on it. There's plenty more to read about and learn about, both on the global scale and within California and San Francisco specifically. In 2021, Governor Newsom signed a slate of 7 bills that promote responsible consumption, composting, recycling, that really address the full circular life cycle of single-use plastics and some other waste streams as well, including organics. And of course, we have extended producer responsibility, or EPR, laws passed in California, as well as Maine, Oregon, and New York, to say nothing of some of our global policy leaders, such as the EU. Let me round it out with a discussion on the circular economy foundations and what those circular business models are. If we go to the next slide, I will walk through 5 business models that we've defined that go around the full value chain from design to end of use, and they're really a framework for transformation. As part of our research for the Circular Economy Handbook, we created about 1,500 case studies of circular business models to really inform our understanding. So I'll go through what the circular business models are and then talk about some of the key enablers to get started. What you can see here are those business models arranged around the cycle. So we begin with circular inputs in the upper left, and this is about using renewable resources, whether they're bio-based materials or man-made materials that are recycled or highly recyclable. Then we go into 3 models that cut across the product life cycle. So product as a service, where a business retains ownership of products and sells benefits through a service or subscription model. Product use extension, which is where a business retains, businesses extend product use through design considerations, such as repairs and creating resale markets for additional cycles. And then a sharing platform, increasing utilization rates of products and assets through shared ownership for second use. Then finally, we go to resource recovery, which is about using embedded materials or energy at end of use of a product and recovering through collection or aggregation and processing. So maybe we can do a quiz later on which of these circular business models some of our panelists represent. But let me close by sharing some of the key enablers we identified for a successful transition to the circular economy. If we go to the next slide. So what we found is that many companies, small and large alike, are embracing the circular business models, but to varying degrees of impact and success. So we've identified 5 key enablers to accelerate the circular economy when they're deployed in combination with one of the circular business models that I just walked you through. And these are first, consumer engagement. So reshaping what it means to consume. Often people don't actually need the actual product. They just need the service or experience that it provides. So we encourage companies to think about how to educate consumers on seeing products as a delivery mechanism for a desired function, as well as the benefits of buying circular products more broadly. Next, design, that crucial first step towards creating circular products. Into reverse logistics, which is the process of creating a take-back loop so manufacturers can receive idle, unwanted, damaged, or underutilized products. This is a very active space in circular economy strategy in the business world currently. Next is ecosystem, which relates to really engaging the actors outside of a company's direct value chain. And I think that so often big intractable challenges require complex solutions that can't be delivered by a single actor, right? So as industries and value chains become increasingly interconnected, it's more important than ever for companies to look outside of their own organization and form partnerships to make it happen. And then finally, disruptive technologies. So we're currently living in what's often referred to as the fourth industrial revolution, where the pace of technological advances is so fast with ever shortening cycles. And of all the 5 enablers, we believe that disruptive technologies are really the most important in accelerating the move to circular and making it economically attractive. And that is why we deliver the Circulars Accelerator program. I will share a link to the program in the chat, but let me pause there in the interest of time because we've got some great speakers to bring this to life even further. Thanks so much for the opportunity to present, and back over to you, Chloe.
Great. Thank you very much, Emmeline. And indeed, as I put on the chat, please put your questions in the chat so that Ellie and Lucy can pick them so we can ask questions at the end of the presentations. And now we're going to move to Mathieu and ask him to upload his presentation. There he is. Go ahead, Mathieu. Merci.
Awesome. Thank you, Chloe. I guess you guys can all see this where it says School Lab in big. Okay.
Yes,
awesome.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you.
And the whale.
Yeah, and the tail. Yeah. Oops. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to join this conversation today. I've been tasked with the impressive challenge of trying to summarize my thought on circular economy in just 10 minutes. So the problem is more 10 minutes than sharing some insights. I also want to give you a disclaimer. I have to teach in about literally 10 minutes, so I'll be pretty rude and leave the Zoom just after this short presentation. But again, thank you so much for bringing me here. And yeah, I'd love to share a bit about maybe who I am and what I'm doing with School Lab in Berkeley, then highlighting a few projects we've been working on that are so-called circular economy projects, and then maybe leave you with my thought on how we can really make this happen and what kind of effort it would require. So yeah, about School Lab. So I'm Mathieu, first of all. I'm the CEO of School Lab, as Chloe introduced, also teaching at Berkeley. School Lab, we call ourselves an innovation studio. We've been around for about 16 years. Most of what we're doing is connecting together and supporting startups, students, and big companies and corporations to help them make those transitions that we think are highly needed. And our goal is to enable 1 million transition to a more inclusive and sustainable world. So really all our activity revolves around the idea of connecting what I love to call the leaders of today and the leaders of tomorrow, and helping them make transition at an individual standpoint as well as organizational standpoint to really try to create this more inclusive and sustainable world. We're spread across the globe, essentially headquartered in San Francisco, Paris, and Ho Chi Minh City. And we've been active in many different places in the world for the past 16 years. About our philosophy, just to put it in 3 words, what we want to do is design a brighter future. The idea is that we use design as a real changing tool. And I think Emmeline made the point of like design is definitely a big leverage to make circular economy and many other changes happen. We think everything starts by design. It's really this action of conceiving something. The brighter is pretty obvious. We focus essentially on impact-driven innovation. And the future is because we work with a lot of youngsters, from students to startups, that we think are the next generations and the one who really gonna make this world a better place. We've been having a strong partnership with UC Berkeley for a long time. I don't think I need to introduce UC Berkeley that much to this audience, but yeah, definitely a strong partnership where we've been interacting with some of the students for a long time. So we have a variety of programs here in the Bay Area, but the one I really want to focus on today is called Deplastify the Planet. So as the name said, it's a sustainable design program aimed to reduce plastic pollution overall. The way it's working is that we at Schoolab kind of create that connections between students and industry partners. I'll show a few logo and a few of our partners just after, but think of any sorts of large Fortune 500 corporations as well as early stage startups who have a pretty interesting product around plastic pollution or reducing plastic pollution. And we create we've created like a platform, a class basically, where we have about 50 students every semester, so about 100 every year, working with 8 to 10 different companies every semester, trying to create meaningful changes and really help them get out of plastic pollution schemes, let's say. So to give more flesh, make it more tangible, I just tried to broad. So we worked on something like 50 different projects. So I just selected 3 that have been labeled by our partners as a circular economy success story. So I'm just going to go through them really briefly and try to show you a bit what we've been doing in this program. So you don't have to read all of this, but basically the idea, the project we did with Whole Foods and Method. So I don't think I have to introduce Whole Foods, but Method is a soap and household products, really active in the sustainability, in their sustainable commitment. The challenge we've been tackling was how can we possibly reuse Whole Foods waste to create soap or packaging for soap from Method and then sell it back in the same Whole Foods. So what the students did is that they realized that the biggest chunk of Whole Foods waste is actually cardboard, because every products are shipped in boxes, and food waste because obviously it's highly perishable. So it was made something like 3 years ago, and at the time they found a pretty revolutionary technology called PHA, which is kind of an alternative to plastic using bio foodstock basically. And so we created a product where we have like 3 layers, 2 layers of cardboard and 1 layer of like food waste in the middle. And we ended up with this nice design of a kind of a carton where you could put detergent in it. What's also interesting with the design is that there's no lid or no cap. So it's a single material product that is actually biodegradable. Another interesting example, a local company called Allbirds, and I hope people in this room currently have Allbirds on their feet. It's a really cool shoe company created by a Berkeley alum as well as a guy from New Zealand. Being from New Zealand, his idea was to create shoes made out of wool, knowing that there's a lot of sheep in New Zealand, obviously. The good thing with wool is that it's a really nice material and it's also biodegradable. So they created that shoe, that sneaker that is almost 100% degradable. Almost, because in the sole, you have something called spandex, which is kind of a polymer that gives this bouncing effect to your sneakers so that it's a really comfortable shoes. So the challenge we had was, okay, it's not 100% biodegradable. How do we can circularize somehow this shoe and make sure it won't end up in landfill basically? So the student came up with a pretty simple idea. What if we tear off most of the wool and then turn the shoe into a flip-flop? That would be pretty consistent with the image of the brand, create a new products for them, as well as flip-flop doesn't really need this kind of bouncing effect. So the sole would definitely be good. And once you're done with using the flip-flop, you can always turn it into furniture. That's what they realized, that could be used in Allbirds stores. And then the third project is actually a project with Etam. Etam is a textile brand from France. They're doing essentially underwears. The challenge with bras especially is that, so at least part of the audience must know that bras are made of a lot of different materials, a lot of different parts, and it's kind of almost impossible to peel it off, to recycle it, or at least, let's say, to shred it and then turn it into something different. So the challenge was really like, how can we reutilize, circularize a bit those bras, because there is like major quantities and it's really hard to turn into a new product. So a lot of ideas arise. One is like using, for instance, the bra cups to do knee pads or other kind of specialty equipment around the textile industry. many other ideas, including, I'm sure it's the very first time in your life you see a picture of a bra on a cow, because bras actually tend to have mastitis. Mastitis is actually an infection related to the fact that milk can stay stagnant in the cow. And so applying a certain pressure and tension would help release this milk and avoid some of those infections. So really out of the box thinking way of how we can reuse some of the best feature of a bra in a very different context. So those are just like 3 interesting projects we worked on, again, labeled as circular economy. But the problem, and in my opinion, this is not truly circular economy. Why? Because I think for all those projects, what we've been doing is just extending the lifetime or give another life to some of the project. But we never moved out from we kind of moved from left to middle, from a linear economy of, as Emmeline was saying, extracting, using, wasting, to just recycling and just, okay, give a second life, maybe a third life, but it's all of it, at the end of the day, it's going to end up as a waste, which I think is not exactly where circular economy is, where circular economy should really be no waste at all, and a complete shift in the mindset and in the paradigm. So what I want to share with you is that that's my image of circular economy. A forest, for instance, is a truly circular economy place where, like dead leaves would turn into nutrients for the trees, where the energy capture for the sun would actually be turned into, shared energy from the leaves to the roots and so on. And it's a true ecosystem where there is nothing such as waste in a forest. And I think that's more the image that I'm picturing for circular economy more than the projects I showed earlier. So just to kind of conclude, what I would like to share with you is like 2 recommendations that I think have been the most circular ones that we did so far to some of our partners. Those 2 recommendations that I'm going to highlight and that I picked haven't really been carried out by the partners. You'll understand why. But I think that's really the goal for us and the place where we want to be. So the first project was with a very large car manufacturer, half French, half Japanese. I'm sure you guys would figure out who they are. What's interesting with this company is that they're manufacturing 9 million cars every year. Each car has 30,000 parts in it, and each part is coming in a packaging in their factory so that they can assemble all the parts and then eventually sell the cars. We generate more than 25,000 tons of plastic waste just from this packaging every year in their factories. So the way they were approaching the challenge was actually, okay, what can we do with this 25,000 tons and how we recycle it? So we just kind of lined up different ways, different places where we can act. And let's start reading from kind of the right side of the screen. So recycling was the first thing they had in mind. Then we suggest, what if we actually find alternative plastic, and instead of using plastic, which is actually single-use plastic, let's use paper or cardboard or fiber, things that are biodegradable. And then we thought, what if we actually resync the supply chain? What if we, does it make sense to have providers spread all across the world shipping pieces one by one? What if they actually assemble it? Or what's the rationale behind having a bumper in a shockproof container if the bumper is designed to be shockproof? So we kind of challenged the whole idea of their supply chain, which they kind of like, but it sounds like, heavy lift. And then we say, do we really need 30,000 parts in a car? Aren't cars too sophisticated? Do we need all those features? Because if we can save the number of parts we're assembling, then we'll save on the packaging, but also on the energy and the resources required to create that parts. And then the real recommendation we made is just stop selling 9 million cars, which is definitely something they had a really hard time accepting. But I believe that's the most kind of circular way of thinking. Because when you think about it, a car is used, for its primary use of bringing you from point A to point B, less than 2% of the time. The rest of the time, it's either park, you're stuck in traffic jam, or looking for a parking spot. And if you think about the incentive for a car company, what they want is to sell you a car. So if your old car is broken, they would sell you a new one. If your car is broken, you'll have to fix it in their mechanics. So their only way to create value and to make money is actually to make sure your car is going to break, which is completely against the circular economy model. So I think this is the place where we want to push some of our partners to say, let's rethink the whole paradigm you had on your own business and your activity. Another example, I can't disclose the partner, but it's, as you can see from their annual revenue, one of the largest companies in the world. And they're doing essentially like foodstuff and agricultural products. Their challenge was, okay, we're creating all those interesting materials. Can you help us create plant-based materials for straws? And our answer was, okay, but the most sustainable thing is just to stop selling straws. Because in my opinion, unless you have a hard time chewing and you're, let's say, people with disability or an older adult, we don't need straws. Like, I think we're educated enough to drink from the glass or even from the bottle sometimes. So I think that's, again, the most circular solution to the problem, which is just to rethink the whole system and change the paradigm. So those are a few partners we had so far in this program, just to show you how broad it can be. But I really want to end up with this idea that I started with, which is about transition. And the place where I'm struggling the most right now, being a teacher and with my students, is this idea of helping them make that transition, of being ambidextrous or even schizophrenic somehow, trying to live at the same time in the old paradigm, in the way we've been trained, in the way we've been thinking about our lifestyle and about economy, which is, again, this very linear model, and this new paradigm, which is, just let's change the whole idea we've been thinking about using a product. To quote Emmeline when she was saying, it's more about the service than the product itself. And I think this idea of transition is really where all of us has to be highly engaged, is making sure this transition can happen from an old paradigm of a linear economy to a circular economy, which would bring, real value, and which I think at the end of the day is our only chance to kind of solve these issues. So just want to, wrap up there and leave you with these two takeaways. One, I think circular economy may be also kind of, confused with and mixed up with recycling. And I deeply believe circular economy is more than just recycling. It's a whole different paradigm. And we need all of you guys to make this transition to, again, like save our species and make this planet a better place. Thank you so much for listening. And again, sorry, I have to leave. Thank you so much for the Chamber of Commerce inviting me.
Oh, fantastic. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Mathieu. And we'll send you questions as we get them later, okay? And we'll share your answers. Have a great rest of the day. So now please, Eden, join us into doing your presentation about the great initiatives that San Francisco Environment Department has in play, and also the partnership that you've established with Reply.
Absolutely. Greetings, everyone. It's so nice to be here with all of you today, with thanks to Chloe and the French American Chamber of Commerce in San Francisco for this invitation to participate in the conversation. As mentioned, I'm going to share some of the ways that San Francisco is thinking about circularity in the building sector. Next, please. So there are a few key items that offer context for this work, so I wanted to mention them because as a city, it's important for us to talk about our commitments and establish goals so everyone understands where we're heading. So we updated our goal to be carbon neutral by 2040 without the purchase of offsets. So this is a strong driver. San Francisco co-led the development of the Advancing Towards Zero Waste Declaration in 2018, which was co-announced with C40, and more than 24 cities also signed on. And this aims to reduce disposal to landfill or incineration 50% by 2030 using a 2015 baseline, and reduce the generation of materials by 15%. So that really speaks to changing our consumption patterns and introducing fewer items in the first place to the use phase, so they don't have to be a burden on the system. And this nicely complements the Clean Construction Declaration that we signed on to at COP26, which includes embodied carbon reductions and reuse themes. Those are intrinsically related to each other and to circularity. Next. So in December, we updated our climate action plan to capture our priorities to advance these and other critical areas. Most of our work on embodied carbon and circularity falls under that first category of responsible production and consumption under strategy 1, which is achieve total carbon balance across the buildings and infrastructure sectors. You can find all 7 actions for these strategies on page 106 of that CAP document, which I've linked. Hopefully it will give some ideas there. Next slide. It's worth noting that diversity of experience and interests have been propelling our work. So within the department, these circularity efforts are a collaboration between several programs, primarily coordinated by the Green Building and Zero Waste programs, though folks from our toxics reduction, environmental justice, and climate programs are also involved. And we also work closely with other city agencies too. Next. For about 4 years now, this ad hoc building materials management group has been exploring the possibility possibilities for reducing embodied carbon emissions by examining the linear life cycle you see here and thinking about ways that each phase can be done differently. Next. So as you can see, there are no shortages of opportunities, and we've been using this diagram as our roadmap to help guide our work. By way of example, I'll touch on just a few interventions, but I just wanted to call out something that's not on the diagram, and that's prevention. And we're in the process of updating our municipal green building requirements. These apply to any activity performed by a city department or on a city-owned property, and anticipate an effective date in January 2023. And our proposed draft limits waste generated per square foot for tenant improvement projects in alignment with that LEED credit. And eventually, we hope to expand this method for tracking to all project types. So the best way to start is not to introduce at all. Next. But if you are going to put something into the system, material reuse, craftsmanship, and markets are going to be critical for circularity. To get to a point when we can create policy that shifts business as usual practices, we first have to ensure that there's infrastructure in place to support any requirements. So next. Our approach, as shown here, is to bolster three distinct areas: the network of suppliers and receivers, a virtual inventory and asset management platform, and physical laydown space. So the first example on the next slide is the Bay Area All for Reuse Alliance, which is one way that we're bolstering the network of suppliers and receivers. Throughout 2021, we provided a series of workshops to create an alliance in partnership with our neighboring municipality at Stop Waste in Alameda County, the Business Council on Climate Change, and the All for Reuse Initiative, which is a volunteer-led initiative of architects and builders. This led to the creation of a cohort with some of the Bay Area's largest portfolio holders, really targeting building owners, renters, and developers to become a unified voice for building material reuse. And while there are educational and networking elements, the primary purpose of this alliance was to sign on to a common pledge and to create individual action plans to increase reuse within each organization with a focus on those tenant improvement projects. And all those action plan templates are available for free. And I'll give you a website where you can find them directly if you're interested. Next. As for the virtual inventory, we were very fortunate to receive funding last year to co-create an online exchange for building products through a Game Changer Fund grant from the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. And as noted, we're partnering with our friends at Briefly, and Gar will be presenting shortly to tell you more about his company. In addition, we have more than 50 other cities now, regionally and nationally, informing the development of this digital platform. So we hope it will raise awareness and visibility of available items and connect suppliers to receivers long before the materials are removed from the site. This will increase the chance for them to be claimed and reduces the need for storage, because we don't have a lot of laydown space. We don't have a lot of place for storage. It also has enhanced reporting, which will then provide us the necessary infrastructure and data insights to establish really sturdy footing for near-term deconstruction and material reuse policy, as well as mechanisms for documentation for all projects. So next. We're also in the process of enhancing the program capacity at our 1 acre site, which is called Building Resources. This is a location that is on port property and leased by the Department of the Environment and run day-to-day by a nonprofit site operator who has been overseeing this retail reuse location for several decades now and primarily focusing on the residential sector. Next, please. Though we're in early days, we're working to bring together the network virtual platform to then support a physical space for commercial products. We currently refer to that program as the BRIC, or the Building Resources Innovation Center. We're discussing with the state of California's freeway owner, Caltrans, the potential to transform a freeway underpass into a physical space to implement the BRIC. And this is the site we're talking about, and it's right in the heart of the design district. Our goal is to create a replicable secondary market for commercial building materials that's interwoven with novel circularity programs as well as community services. So some ideas include piloting what we're calling an escrow process for the temporary storage of salvaged products to aggregate the larger quantities required for commercial construction, as well as a last mile extended producer responsibility program to gather a targeted product en masse for donation first and then eventual pickup by the manufacturer, which really makes it easier for them and meets their minimum quantities to justify the pickup. The brick components themselves will be adaptable and designed for disassembly and reassembly so that it can be relocated if necessary to respond to the city's evolving urban fabric. Next. I also wanted to mention a few other efforts underway in support of circularity. San Francisco is working toward a citywide deconstruction policy based on a materials inventory, and we're planning to convene our technical advisory committee later this year. Also, the Bay Area Deconstruction Work Group is a collaborative forum where other cities and counties in the region come together to support each other toward deconstruction policies, and all are welcome to attend our quarterly meetings. We've had over 500 people come from all over the world. Next. We also have specific product categories to be source separated in municipal construction projects, and this helps extend their useful life. In addition, our San Francisco Board of Supervisors recently updated our construction and demolition debris recovery ordinance, and it includes a fee-based permit to legally transport mixed debris. So the cost is based on the size of the transport vehicle as well as the frequency. But any source separated material is exempt from transporter permit requirements. So this creates an early stage incentive for deconstruction. Next. We're also working to better understand opportunities to capture materials for reuse that come out of our tenant improvement refresh activities, as well as frequent renovations due to short-term leases. I mentioned this a lot, tenant improvements over and over, and that's because San Francisco has a lot of startups and Class A office space, as well as retail and restaurants and hospitality that often replace their building materials for reasons other than exhaustion of their useful life. So we want to find ways to put them into reuse if they're being prematurely discarded. And next, there is the issue of materials that are purchased but not ever installed. This tends to be a blind spot for the industry. And this could be because of specification, attic stock requests, procurement practices, or just changes that happen in the job. So in November, we completed a study about the landscape of construction surplus, and we're grateful for the partnership of about a dozen local general contractors and their subs that worked with us. You can download the complete study at the link shown here, but one fun fact that we learned, not so fun, only about 18% of surplus items have the highest degree of confidence for immediate reuse. So these are items that are purchased and likely just disposed instead of sent someplace for installation. Next. Finally, we're hoping to explore ways to change upstream practices too, such as design for disassembly practices. So this is ways to shift the way we think about design and construction. And then next, as well as learning from our EU counterparts about buildings as material banks. These are two themes that are included as what we call BHAGs, or big, hairy, audacious goals in our climate action plan. And we aim to have at least one municipal project incorporate these circularity principles into design and construction before 2030. Next. That's my time, I believe. So you can find more about these efforts and others too on our webpage. All the things I mentioned are linked from sfenvironment.org/BMM. And I look forward to your questions. And of course, please contact me to continue this conversation. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Eden. And without any waiting, we'll pass the mic on to Gar so he can tell us a little bit more. I'm interested in knowing how you're pricing all of these, building materials that you're facilitating the exchange on. Go ahead, Gar.
That's a great question, and we can get more into that because that's just basic supply and demand. So yes. While the demand might be low, that keeps the supply low. But I know that a lot of the work that Eden and I have been always ideating on and working on is how do we raise that value and create these commodity price floors by really maintaining the useful life cycle of these materials. But we can get into that, and I'll talk about Reaply first, and then we can start getting into more specifics with any extra time with questions. Thank you so much for having me. This has been almost a 101 course refresher for everything circular economy by all of the great presentations that were in front of me, and I hope that I can actually build on that as we talk about what Reaply is engaging in and what we actually aspire to solve when it comes to BHAGs, again, that Eden referenced. So from our angle, it's all about resource exchange. And this takes on a couple different ways. It's either internal for Reaply or external, again, for finding other additional uses of reuse. So when we're thinking about our problems that we're looking at solving, we're always thinking about how to make things more discoverable, transferable, and valuable in a global economy. And this takes on a couple different facets that I'll dive into. But we've been doing this for a little bit now, and we've been trying to solve this problem and trying to, again, scale our solution and grow our company for a little bit. Which has been a lot of fun. And it's through great partnerships, again, like what we have with Eden in the Department of San Francisco, the environment, or with other for-profit industries as well that have taken on ambitious projects to either increase their reuse internally or figure out new ways to price outgoing surplus or work on new systems and process change to think about outgoing surplus. And we have a significant value that we have on the platform today. We've worked with many ecosystem partners, and we've actually taken on, again, more funding from our large either investors that might be on the corporate level or investors that might be either on either coast or even here in Chicago to really solve this hairy problem. But it all starts with the challenges of what we think of our sort of our problem statements. It's always needing to know what resources that we have with any large client they're looking to use internally. So it's not really knowing what's actually happening internally or how to make those purchasing decisions and make those cost decisions that while might be affecting some sort of sustainability focused outcome like waste reduction actually means some sort of ROI to a company. And so we often see that in terms of how we sell to an organization, our solution of multiple benefits. Yes, it's to your bottom line, but also you get all of these other impactful results as well. And then we can really work with their teams to address quickly getting rid of fixtures and replacing them and figuring out how that all works when it comes to reuse. Reuse for us is a latency problem. What I mean by that is and we actually saw this with Eden speaking about this with when things get deconstructed and when they move on to their next life cycle, is it's actually all about connecting supply and demand in the quickest time frame possible. It's in the time frame when someone says, hey, I have this thing. And when someone says, I want that thing, it's in that time frame that a wasteful decision is made, where it becomes too costly to hold on to something, or it's just too easy to pay some sort of fee and get rid of it and send it to landfill. And so we need to keep decreasing that latency between supply and demand. And again, how Reaply looks to get this done is increasing the visibility. So how do we make sure that things are more visible at our large organizations or our other business partners so that we can help them save money internally through reuse by making sure that there's more departmental connections to actually save money on chairs, save money on other types of operational infrastructure, even IT equipment or other types of peripherals that go into researching. How do we actually improve that efficiency of that organization? The management to make those better decisions when a procurement manager is going to actually decide, oh, we need to actually buy these items. How can we actually start to make the purchasing decisions as simple as not buying new, but also buying reused, either through internally one's own organization or connecting them to other partners that we have to actually increase those reuse possibilities. So really connecting those partners. And as we spoke about before, from an ecosystem perspective, how do we actually make sure that we're connecting and collaborating across multiple partners and connecting them, in our case, on Reaply to do just that. And then from a disposition perspective, as we connect many partners, we do see that there's not always a reuse outcome available internally. So how do we actually create more disposition outcomes that isn't just reuse? How do we actually look towards remanufacturing or refurbishment, or even at the last stage possible, the recycling outcomes as well? But anything that can be done to work within very tight timeframes goes the long way to actually increase the impact associated with the community, but decrease the impact associated with landfill. And then from a Reaply platform perspective, we kind of segment out what we are able to provide. So we work with creating a resource visibility system, then combine that with an online exchange platform, and then build in real-time reporting so that more administrators, more users that might be on the platform understand the impact that they're actually contributing to. And it's that continued feedback mechanism that's very important, because it's not just maybe money saved, but an average user that might be bringing available surplus onto the platform should be rewarded by knowing their impact on the system and knowing their impact to the total impact. And then from a Reaply services perspective, how do we actually get more organizations that are at phase 0 to really understand the impact that this could have on their organization, and then move them towards phase 1, move them towards phase 2 by providing more services to actually help them and augment their own abilities to engage in the circular economy through reuse, remanufacturing, refurbishment, etc. And so again, as we build out this Reaply platform, we start to see more and more availability of resources. We start to get a better understanding of how many items are actually available at large organizations or across associated partners. We start to really get into the details of what each one of these items might mean, either to an organization or to another external partner. And we can go down the line and start making innovative relationships and data streams possible by partnering with upstream manufacturers to get more and more data associated with what the impact might be from a cost perspective, from a weight perspective, or even a material construction for an item. So we know the best outcomes that can happen. We know the value of these items, either because they're well made or they've got significant market value too on the next stage of their journey. And then reporting all of this is very important again. So capturing that weight, really informing users on how that was diverted from landfill. We're working with lots of teams, lots of better minds than ours on even then what does this mean for estimated embodied carbon. This is not something that one company can solve. It needs the collaboration of multiple organizations and state agencies to come together to create really impactful metrics to define for organizations why this is important, and then even in the future, further incentivize those organizations. Because once you can really define metrics, then you can start to create different economic and incentivizing models to actually encourage and embracing reuse and embracing other innovative systems that will help benefit circular economy business models. And then again, all of that goes into the value itself. So not just the metrics, but actually what does the hard numbers mean when a company decides that we want to be our own supplier of furniture because we own a couple thousand chairs? What does that mean when we actually don't buy new chairs? We actually work with a local service provider to refurbish or remanufacture those chairs and get them back into working condition in our organization. Here's a good case study. It's one of our most common because we love working with them as a local company too in the Bay Area. I see that as being very impactful. In our phase 1 work with Google, we are actually able to recapture some of this value internal to their own operations, and then actually begin our next phase of work, which is tracking more of that furniture, fixtures, and equipment that this organization has with more QR codes. So actually really tracking and understanding the utilization rates, the condition, but then also any relocation plans to actually maximize reuse. Also, this is a local company in Chicago that we've been able to work with for some time, where we've been able to actually identify inventory in their own operations that is highly valuable. When we start talking about biopharmaceuticals or pharmaceutical companies in general, or other R&D locations or organizations, the values stack up quite quickly. We're dealing with high value chemicals, high value reagents, things that might be used for research and as well as high value research equipment. And so it's very easy to actually really calculate these costs and really actually understand the impacts associated with reuse and connecting these systems and locations to one another to actually recapture that weight, divert that weight from landfill, and then actually increase the overall departmental resiliency for any of these organizations. We've seen this actually reuse be very helpful for many organizations when dealing with supply chain issues. You can't order actually some of these components or some of these reagents or some of these pieces of research equipment. Well, you actually might as well look internally first and see if you can source it from within for your own colleagues that haven't been using, for lack of a complete understanding of research equipment, a simple microscope. I don't know many of the other complicated pieces of research equipment, but I'll use that one as an example. From a sustainability consulting standpoint, we just really work on actually working with our clients and identifying resources or processes or other elements that are already in motion at an organization and just connecting those dots. Sometimes there's actually many things working in similar patterns or similar motions, but maybe those efforts actually haven't been brought together to create a useful reuse process. And we work with companies, again, like Nicor Gas or Microsoft, to really actually embrace that. Target's a great example for, again, someone who's looking to receive on-site support and really look at actually how are we addressing the inventory associated with reuse when it comes to operational assets. How do we avoid double procurement? How do we bring visibility to the excesses that might be involved in remodels or what might be actually left over at distribution centers? All of this goes into the ecosystem. All of this needs to be connected. And how are we actually moving something from a Class A building that Eden mentioned all the way through a JLL partner network, moving that to a small business or maybe even a local nonprofit? There's use to be had across an ecosystem. We just actually need to make it more visible and make it more approachable for any organization at any time in a community. Thank you so much. Again, I look forward to answering more of those questions too. Please, if you want to hold up your camera, that's totally fine. You can connect with me on LinkedIn via this QR code. I'll give you a beat to do that because I'll move on to the next QR code, which actually is our podcast. And so I host a podcast where we get to talk about the multi-use-averse, which is everything that needs to be multi-used. I was already joined by one of our favorite guests, Eden. And so if you want to check out that podcast, please feel free. Check out this QR code or check us out at our podcast page on our website. Thank you so much for the extra time.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gar. And thank you to the other panelists. We have a few minutes for questions. People obviously may have to leave, but we hopefully the three of you can stay a couple more minutes. I saw also in the chat that Eden shared, who is included in the Ripley, local work, if you wish, between Alameda County, San Jose, Palo Alto, and many companies, which is great. I think we need to get every single county involved with you guys because the work that you do is so important. I deal with a lot of small business in Marin County, actually, and oftentimes, their issues are they're moving into a new space and having to reconstruct or adapt the space to their needs. It's very expensive if they had access, and also obviously furnish it and so on and on. Having access to this database and being able to go on this marketplace would certainly reduce their cost, I think, greatly. There's a lot of initiatives around the Bay to convert malls into residential places, right? Because we have these mandates to build habitats for people who can't afford it usually, and unfortunately, and deconstruct, if you wish, all the big businesses that have vacated, like all the big stores and everything. So there must be a very big opportunity to make sure that whatever they tear down is going to be reused in the same place when you think about it versus, distributing it all over the place. But I think this is very exciting to learn that, this is taking place and hopefully will keep growing. Yeah. Are you involved, or do you how do you find your clients, Gar, when you go? Do you have a sales team that actually is convincing, or yeah.
Do we ever? And trust me, if you want to get in touch with one of them, by all means. But yes, we do. And it
Okay.
started off smaller with myself, with our CEO,
Okay.
just pretty much always going to conferences and shaking hands and trying to get the message out. It's been really interesting to be involved in this industry. I love this industry because it collects so many from so many different paths.
Right.
And so that's been really fun to be involved, and really then be at the beginnings of what will be, I believe, our future economy. And so with that comes a lot of responsibility in both advocating for solutions now that can be real, but then also work within existing business models to start shifting the change. And that's been challenging, without a doubt. But the conversation is happening, and you consistently see more and more being done every year, to really actually manifest that change. And so that's been a lot of fun to actually see in the last couple of years.
That's fantastic. I have a solution, or one that we could implement, is give city permits for construction to the ones who are adopting this this solution. Give them their permits faster and cheaper maybe than the ones who are, ignoring the opportunity.
I'll jump in and say, we're giggling about it, but that's actually something we're talking about.
Great. Okay.
Currently in the Bay Area, Air Quality Management District is responsible for issuing a demolition permit, a document called the J number, and it can take 7 more months for that to get processed. So one of the things we've been thinking about is it possible for us to say, okay, if you're going to demo a building, wait for that J number, but if you're going to deconstruct it, we'll give you your permit now. And so that, when people talk about the increased time that it takes to deconstruct, you would more than make up for that time, and time being money makes it very, very valuable. So that is definitely one of the strategies that we are entertaining and in conversation about. How do we incentivize this instead of it just being a hammer? How can it also, be something that folks want to do? And with respect to the, shifting in use, rather than demolish the building, we'd love to start with adaptive reuse. I didn't mention that, but I do often in the conversation about circularity, how do we design for flexibility? How do we maintain the structure of buildings? Because the structure is where a lot of the embodied carbon and energy resources are, even though I focused a lot on tenant improvements because we see so much of that. Concrete, steel, glass, insulation. These are, big, heavy hitters. And if we could design the building's structure to last 300 years and be really thoughtful about the circularity opportunities for what happens inside, that's even better than saying, you know what, let's scrap what's already there and build what we want and build it with recycled materials. As far as I'm concerned, everything I see outside the window is a deficit that we now have to make up for. So let's really kind of stop the bleeding. A Band-Aid's not going to be enough.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very interesting. And, you look at Europe, and we have built over the centuries buildings that are still up. So I don't understand why we can't do this in today's environment. But, are there questions from the audience? This is the opportunity for you to, unmute and ask a question or two. Anyone? Okay.
There was a question previously from Claude Dardon. So
Okay.
This question has somewhat been answered indirectly, but we can maybe extend the answers. So the question was, circular economy needs a lot of stakeholders like consumers, consumer good companies, recycling companies, states, counties, cities. But is there a place where all of them can work together? So it's a question that can become more almost philosophical, but I think maybe Aidan, you can answer more on that, knowing that you also presented what the city does to bring all these stakeholders together.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and we do need to see more collaboration in this space. I think Ellen MacArthur Foundation does a really good job at bringing a lot of different actors into one room at a time, and pose a question and see, since we each have our own hand on, our hand on a different part of the elephant, as it were. It's really great when those meetings occur and we have that chance. It's also in some ways what I see as a role of government, to be that convener. And so that's why we created the Bay Area All for Reuse Alliance, to bring folks together. We are very aware and try to avoid of creating policy in a vacuum. So we rely heavily on the Bay Area Sustainable Construction Leaders. We go to conferences and like Greenbuild, which is coming up in San Francisco in November, and bring these items to, we shine a light on them in places where it might not be discussed otherwise. There's a lot of interest in embodied carbon at Greenbuild for the last 3-4 years now. And we're going to be talking about our surplus study this year. We're going to, kind of throw a wrench in it and help people understand that items are being purchased and never installed. So what can we do to change our practices? How do we get to prevention first? We're also, going to the conferences of the recyclers and the facilities talking about this. So we're trying to bring a lot of maybe unlikely actors together, as well as the usual suspects. And I do think that's a role that we can play. But having said that, there's, communication makes the world go around. So the more we can do, and I do think that Reaply also affords that too. The project that we're working with them on, this started as a Bay Area marketplace, and we now have 52 cities across the country involved in conversation, and also cross borders through the Pacific Coastal Collaborative. And so, as Gar mentioned, we need to be able to have a kind of its scale so that ultimately we can be in competition with virgin products and buying something off the shelf. And so if Reaply can provide that platform, it will have the nonprofits, the schools, the businesses, government, everyone coming together to do their exchanges and hopefully learn from each other and basically establish what is the price of some of these items and what is the value that they can offer.
I obviously agree with that. This is, I think for us, we want it to be built on our platform, and that comes with a significant responsibility to build something, and as Eden also said, with significant empathy to the stakeholders. So we can't be building things technology-wise of which we don't know some of these problems. And so it's actually been to the credit of government agencies that can gather the appropriate voices to say, hey, this is cool what y'all are building, but it doesn't solve this for me. And then we get to go, great, tell us more. We want to learn more with you. What can we build into this to actually help the platform be more relevant to whatever type of organization brought that voice? And so that's really important to our product team. It's really important to our sales org to get in touch with those types of people to continue to learn.
And I think that, getting the states and, other government institutions to mandate some of these things is going to be very important. When you look at the solar industry, it was almost at a standstill because the construction industry didn't understand or prepare their building for easier installation, right, of panels on roofs and everything, or even on the sides. Slowly, this is changing, and with the latest, the state had to mandate in certain states that all new constructions had to be solar ready. It made so much more sense to do that. Then now, obviously, with the IRA, things are going to be accelerating because the incentives are just so great from all facets, right? And are going to benefit the installers as well as the manufacturers and so on and on. So that finally, we're going to probably have a better, success rate going forward with thanks to this. So I think hopefully only we can mandate cities to get involved and to essentially follow your lead and participate in this exchange, because it's so important. In Novato, we have about 3 enormous buildings from firemen's funds that have been sitting empty for now 15 years in a beautiful property. And finally, one developer is made a proposal to change it into housing. But we don't really know exactly how they're going to do it. But to your point, Eden, they're probably going to destroy, the existing, buildings, which are really big, and then, restart from scratch, which makes no sense to me. But so those are examples of things that are still not being taken care of. Any other questions from people?
Just to continue on what you just said, the movement sometimes come as well from the employees within companies. And how would you say that we increase, the education, the awareness towards any individuals, towards circular economy, so that then they can, bring that to their own companies? And maybe, Gar, that's a bit the purpose, one of the purpose of your podcast as well, to educate any individual toward that.
Yes, it's a lot of fun in terms of a podcast to be able to just have those free conversations. And I greatly enjoy being able to not just, selfishly just bring that to myself, which is, I think it just is entertaining to me to be able to know that there are other people out there. There are other people that are working on solutions. And I think what could really be such a disservice to this industry and what we're building is to not have enough communication. There's so much opportunity for competition, but even before that, there's so much opportunity to be more cooperative and really figure out these solutions in a pre-competitive motion. And so even though Reaply is a for-profit company, we're already having conversations with other for-profits to increase the scale of marketplace activity, to increase the scale of other types of solutions where we can maybe create interoperability between services, so that more things can be seen and more things can find more utility. And so I think just that motion of starting a conversation, beginning the education component, leads to so much more.
If I can, I'd love to add that, one of the purposes of us doing publications is to help make the invisible visible. And so to that end, as part of our policy for embodied carbon reductions that's proposed for municipal projects to be effective early next year, we worked with the Carbon Leadership Forum out of the University of Washington in Seattle to develop what we call the Embodied Carbon Reduction Strategies Worksheet. And it's divided up by design and construction phase of things you can consider in each phase, and how we're using it and how we set up the worksheet with them. And this is available on their website for free for anyone to use. We didn't make it a San Francisco thing. We explicitly partnered with the Carbon Leadership Forum, so this can become a tool for anyone. But it has a column under schematic design. Are you going to pursue this? Yes, no, what do you think you're going to do? And then at as-builts, when the project teams actually have to turn it back into me and say, this is what we actually did, and this is what worked, and this really didn't. And by the end of a little while, we hope to compile enough information to be able to say, you know what, everyone is doing this. We can make it city policy, or no one is doing this. We need to find out what the roadblocks are. And so even just providing a tool like that, a checklist that says, by the way, are you thinking about reuse? Are you thinking about adaptive reuse in your earliest concept designs? Are you thinking about what's available to you in lieu of virgin materials, during your schematic design phases and construction documents, design development and construction document phases. So even just making it available to them and visible and part of their day-to-day responsibility adds awareness. And eventually, policy is not going to just be on deconstruction. It has to also be on the uptake, right? So otherwise we'll just have very well-organized organized landfills. And so one of the things we're talking about is, do we do something as poetic as the 1% for art movement, where a certain amount of your construction cost has to be dedicated to reuse? Is it construction costs? Is it units? Is it by product type? If you're using this kind of product type, certain amounts of it have to be reused. We're not sure yet about the path, but the poetry of the 1% for art, I think, gives us a really good jumping off point to, again, raise awareness, introduce it to folks, and put it in their kind of frame of consideration, whereas before it just kind of was a credit that was skipped in the rating system.
Right, yeah. So I see that there was a question from Sultan Sabrin about, bringing the circular economy concept to small towns in rural areas or to schools, getting students involved. So there are, several let's say startup activities, not-for-profit startup activities with high school students, where they try to instill, entrepreneurship ideas into high school students and young college students. That could be one way of actually introducing this topic to them. The other one is obviously part of education, in different schools. But I don't know, is the city thinking, Eden, of actually connecting with schools and sharing all this great information?
Yeah, so at the Department of the Environment, we actually have a school ed program, and we go into K through 12 schools and we talk about all these things. We talk about toxics, we talk about zero waste, we talk about green building. We were even working with them on a module about embodied carbon. So that is one of the things that we're responsible for at the department, is to work with the local educators to help inform their curriculum. And then I also do mentorship with a program called Project Green Challenge, which is an international program that works with high school students and college age students to find solutions and implement solutions in their schools locally. And they get paired with mentors and actually do something and then it's celebrated broadly using social media and the web, and of course their word of mouth as students. So there's also other programs in the K through 6-ish category that we do. So we do start young, and knowing that we do have to change mindsets early on in order to have success.
Fantastic. There is also a question on whether or not you work with the food industry.
Yes, and one of my colleagues, Alexa Keelty, would be the perfect one to follow up with on this. She's been working with food systems for a couple decades now through the Department of the Environment. She's been here for a little while. And a few years ago, we did a project with restaurants through a grant where we actually measured their waste and gave them real-time feedback, which shifted the way they ordered food in restaurants and also helped them better make use of scraps for food stock and other innovative meal additives where you still get the nutrients. And so there's a lot going on with food. San Francisco's had a composting program for more than 25 years, very successful. It's one of our big strategies to help close our gap in lieu of carbon offsets. It's all about that carbon drawdown in the soil through our partnerships with the North Bay farmers. And UC Berkeley actually recently did a study that demonstrated just how valuable that carbon is and that carbon accounting. So there's a lot being done in this space in the Bay Area. Actually, talking about communication and awareness, we recently did a whole campaign where there was a hidden camera, and as if folks threw something in the trash that could be composted, the trash can actually made a little sound, let them know about methane. And then they were able to receive some information about alternatives to throwing things in the black bin, because very little goes in the black bin here.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
By the way,
go ahead.
Amory, who asked that question, is calling from the Philippines.
Oh,
fantastic.
wonderful. Well, I was just meeting with Anne-Marie's counterparts in the Philippines and Singapore last week. So
Yes, yeah.
greetings from San Francisco.
So, you know, the French community puts on a Bastille Day festival every year. We restarted a tradition that was, you know, pretty big in the 1800s. And we've learned that any event in San Francisco has to be a zero waste event. So, you know, we go to the training every year so that we can be, be updated, and then we follow all the rules. And it actually is very beneficial because we get a kickback at the end. Being a zero waste event essentially allows us to, capture about $900 back on our expenses for Recology. So indeed, the city is doing a great job, in trying to get everybody on board with recycling and reusing and so on and on. So
yes, I believe we have a big reuse-SF website now, a huge campaign for consumers. Check out the billboards, check out the website for more information. And that's targeting consumers, not building products yet, but definitely getting folks thinking about, again, shifting mindset on what it means to reuse.
Excellent, excellent.
I'm sorry,
I know
for the sake of checking the time, I think we're going to have to close. So I just wanted to thank again, maybe Emeline, Mathieu, Eden, and Gar for being such amazing speakers today. And of course, the Sustainability Committee led by Chloe, Ellie, and Christine, who are here today as well, for just, making the time in addition to their work.
And Lucy for helping us with this.
And lots of people actually from the Sustainability Committee who was meeting on a regular basis and who put up this, who put together this webinar for us today. And thank you again so much to all of you. Just on a final note, because I know this is a kind of never-ending topic, obviously, but on a similar thing, I just want to point out that the French consulate is having an event on decarbonizing transports on, I think, September 22. So for those of you who are interested, it's a little bit related, not exactly, about all of this. There will be a panel of experts discussing how the automotive industry is accelerating its transition from thermal to electric and hydrogen-powered vehicles, and how public authorities accompany the future of mobility. So that will be on September 22, and I might just put the link. If I think space is limited, so if you're interested in joining, and if you're in San Francisco, obviously, I've just put the link in there. But again, thank you so much. We have recorded this video, so it will be available, and we'll share with everyone the contact details of all the speakers and the Sustainability Committee. Thank you to all.
Great. Thanks everybody for being on board today. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Eden. Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.